Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again with another video. Today we're talking about Outlander, the book series by Diana Gabaldon, but more specifically, actually, for today's video, we'll be talking about the TV show adaptation on Starz. I'm only a little more than halfway into Book 3, Voyager, still, having read just a few of the short stories and side novellas as well, but I am totally caught up with the show so far as of the end of 2022. That is 6 seasons, and I plan to update my seasons ranking after every new season comes out. I also plan to do a ranking of all the books I've read once I'm another book or two, into the series, just because I want to be able to have more than like 2 or 3 entries in the ranking to make it exciting enough. Anyway, today we're all about the show. A little backstory before we get into the ranking. The Outlander series played a big part in me and my fiance meeting and falling in love way back in 2020. We had matched on a dating app, hadn't met in person, and I challenged myself to get really into some of her favorite things, some of her favorite shows. She suggested Outlander, and I immediately fell in love with it, fell in love with the show. And then, of course, eventually I fell in love with her once we met and hung out a few times. Anyway, before I actually met her, I watched about 2.5 seasons by myself, just texting her my predictions and updates on my progress, my thoughts on the episodes. But then when I started actually hanging out with her, I watched the end of Season 3, all of Season 4, and eventually Season 5 with her and her mom, who was also a big fan of the show. Recently, I got to experience my first season, waiting week after week for another episode, in the shortened, but still, in my opinion, pretty good Season 6, and now, all of us, we can't wait for Season 7 to come out, even though I might personally like a little bit more time to give myself more time to get caught up on the books. Without further ado, let's get into it. And sadly, in 6th place, I feel like I have to put the most recent season, Season 6. From what I understand, this season adapts a lot of the 6th book, A Breath of Snow and Ashes, but Season 5 adapted some of that book's storylines already, and Season 7 might tie up a few more. I might be mistaken, though, as I haven't gotten that far with the books. I really enjoyed this season, even though I'm putting it at the bottom in 6th place. I actually loved how small scale a lot of the drama was. I really enjoyed the Christie family, that whole fascinating set of characters and the tension they brought to the Ridge. I enjoyed finally seeing Roger grow into a more interesting and capable character. I wasn't the biggest fan of Claire drugging herself up, though, but I was a big fan of the stuff with wondering if they should arm the natives or not. There's some interesting time travel ethics there. Everything with Lizzie's storyline was hilarious and kind of pretty cool that they included that in the show. And of course, there's a good bit of shock and twists and cliffhangers come the last few episodes. But I just wish some of those surprises and mysteries and loose ends were tied up a little better. If they were introduced like right at the end of the last episode, that would be one thing. But we have, for instance, a scene of a mysterious character whistling in a jail cell at the end of episode 4 or like 5. So surely you'd think something like that gets tied up by the end of the season, right? With a few more episodes to go. But you'd be wrong. Same thing happens with a few other mysteries in the last few episodes. I just wish one or two of the kind of cliffhangers were resolved a little better within Season 6 itself. And of course I can't wait for Season 7 now, but I think they could have inserted those cliffhangers more strategically to not leave me and my family as frustrated. Then in 5th place, I'm going to put Season 3, which is the adaptation of Book 3, Voyager. This is a fast-paced, intense whirlwind of a season, and I kind of wished it would slow down a bit more than it did. First, you have our protagonists separated, and of those two parallel decades-long storylines, I was only really invested in Jamie's in the show. Funny enough, I actually loved Claire's half of the section as much as Jamie's in the book, but for some reason the way they did it in the show made me really bored every time we had to go to like the 1950s and 60s. And then some chaos ensues around the reunion in the middle of the season, sort of just giving Claire medical work to do out of nowhere, or probably to remind us that Claire is good at being a doctor. And then everything with Leary is a mess. I wish Claire was just a tiny bit more patient with Jamie there. I understand her shock and frustration, but I always felt like Claire would at least hear someone out, Anyway, then our protagonists are pulled apart again for the second half of the story. I like the stuff on the boats, but I just don't get why they have to be separated from each other. And finally, everything in the Caribbean felt a bit rushed to me. Like some cool character reunions and time travel reveals, but still a bit too rushed for my liking. So that was season 3 in 5th place. In 4th place, I'll put season 1, the adaptation of book 1, Outlander. And so far, this is the longest season. Because of that length, at 16 episodes, I believe, it is a rather slow season at times, but I actually think that works well in getting us into the characters, the setting, really building to those powerful emotional moments. The cast here is outstanding, and I think they only go on to outdo themselves in future seasons. Tobias Menzies as the wicked Blackjack Randall is particularly notable, but also Katrina Balfe is just hands down the best performer of the show. She steals every single scene she's in, and her as a protagonist is really what hooked me. One of the things that really hooked me and why I love the show so much. I also love how the Jamie rescuing Claire situation in the middle isn't the finale climax, but Gabaldon and the showrunners let us sit with the characters for a whole other half of the season after that to build to a moment when Claire has to be the one rescuing Jamie. I love the structure of it. I think I'm only knocking this down to 4th place because it is a little slower than some of my favorite seasons, and also we haven't been introduced to a lot of my favorite characters and or settings so early on by this point. And then in 3rd place, I'm gonna put season 4. This season is based on the 4th novel, Drums of Autumn. I was always more drawn to European history than US history, so I was actually kind of worried that my love of the series would dip once the characters go to the colonies, go across the Atlantic. I am happy to say that that didn't happen, which should be evident if you're keeping track and know that 2 of my top 3 seasons take place in the colonies. I would say the majority of my problems with this season stem from one character, that being Roger. I feel like he never seemed particularly slut-shamey or chauvinistic in previous seasons, but here his whole falling out with Bree just paints him in such a bad light. And then while I'm invested in her adventure to go help her mom and meet her dad, I never cared about Roger chasing after her, especially after what we saw of him in the first part of the season. I wouldn't have minded if he was ripped apart going through the stones, or if he was thrown overboard on his way from Scotland to America. And then the comic misunderstanding that leads Roger to getting sold to the Mohawk just stretches credibility a little bit too much. Like, really? You're going to go through such an ordeal and through such drastic lengths just because Lizzie's making an assumption about what she thought she saw? It seemed a little unbelievable. That said, I actually don't mind Roger as a prisoner, and I really, really like little Ian's whole character arc this season. I'm also a big fan of Claire coming face to face with Aunt Jacosta's participation in the slave trade, and then while Bonnet isn't as compelling a villain as Blackjack Randall, Stephen Bonnet, I think he's still quite good. Then in 2nd place, and my top 2 are really, really close, but in 2nd place I have season 5 based on mostly the Fiery Cross, book 5, with some of the plot lines of A Breath of Snow and Ashes, book 6, sprinkled in throughout. I would say this season is actually perfectly paced. It's not as slow as season 1, but not as maddeningly breakneck as season 3. I enjoy some of the smaller scale episodic storytelling here, like the snake bite, the plot to seize Jacosta's property, the creepy horrible man kept in like a rotting dying state in the attic of that one house they find. This season also has some great payoff and like bigger multiple episode long kind of storylines. What they do with the Murtaugh's character is really emotionally resonant. The Battle of Elements is great. What Roger goes through kind of during and after that battle, while I still don't like him much at this point, I still feel bad for the guy. And then I love when he and Ian are bonding over kind of shared grief and trauma. I thought how they wrapped up the Bonnet storyline was really, really strong. Very compelling stuff. I actually felt like all of that made a stronger conclusion than the real finale episode of the season. The actual finale is a really difficult watch. It's done in a tasteful and thought-provoking way, so the season doesn't quite end on its highest note, I don't think, but it definitely ends on a powerful note. And I just love Fraser's Ridge. This is the season where that place really just started to feel like home. But in first place, I have to go with season 2 based on book 2, Dragonfly and Amber. So far, this is my favorite book as well. What can I say? I love Paris and Versailles. I love the production design, the costuming, and even I love the witty writing in France. I love it all. I love Claire finding a really successful and practical way to apply her medical schools at l'Hôpital d'Angers, or whatever it's called. I love the frame narrative of knowing she goes back, but not knowing exactly how or why. And I love all of the important questions asked about tempting fate, trying to change history. If you have knowledge of the past and or future, does that knowledge give you enough power to change anything? Should you change anything? And also, what did some of these more high-profile historical figures actually look, talk, and act like? I love the Paris half, but I also love the action-packed second half, full of the drama and tension of the just totally doomed Jacobite rising and the heartbreaking midpoint with Faith and the equally heartbreaking conclusion back at the Stones. I love this season. In fact, for that matter, I love the whole series. If you haven't checked it out and you have any interest in this brilliant mix of historical fiction, romance, time travel, you simply have to give it a shot, either by reading the books or watching the show, or maybe even doing both. If you would like to see more Outlander content, please like and subscribe, comment, share this video with any friends you have who might be interested in the series. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a nice day. Bye.